and it might sound slightly, I don't know, condescending, but it's not meant that at all, is how do you define story? A personal narrative story. So not a children, we're not talking about fiction. We're in the world of personal narrative, true stories. But beyond that, like what is it? A bit of a loaded question, but I want to hear what you have.
A retelling of an experience.
Yeah. This is going to be helpful.
The reliving of an experience in front of others, or with alongside others, maybe, or opening that, having that feeling of a story, and then having the audience feel along with you.
Yeah, I agree. So you went through something. You're telling us something. There's one. Are you good?
I'm good.
Are we recording?
I think we are recording.
So I was asking them what. You're never gonna sit down, are you? She's like
I used to run a
my
theater,
sister.
so
She never
forgive
stops.
me.
It's like this is sit. Sit. All right. So I was just asking everybody to sort of lead into what is a story. Personal now, like the moth or the Monty. Are you familiar with the Monty locally? The kinds of stories they tell there.
I am, but tell.
No. So that's the question. What is it? What makes a story and not something else? Not an anecdote.
It's curated in some way.
All right.
I think, right? You've taken a specific attention to the details you're
Mm-hmm.
gonna tell.
All right. How is that different than maybe like an anecdote? This crazy thing happened. I was in college. And
It's shorter,
maybe.
punchier, maybe.
Maybe. I am kind of looking for one thing you can tell. I'm like, look.
But
it's a big thing. It's a-
versus anecdote?
Not necessarily. It's
More
a,
lesson?
it's a big thing. So in the circles I run in, you need change. Without change, it's not a story. Some kind of change.
Okay.
Something. It could be small. It doesn't have to be that you lost 100 pounds. Some kind of change. Some kind of change in understanding about yourself, the world, or people. It could be big. It could be small. It could be good. It could be bad. But without any change, it's not really a story. It's an anecdote. So, and that matters because when I ask about your stories or your potential stories, that's the starting point. What's the change? And if you know it, it's a great place to start because you build around it. And if you don't know it, then we talk about it. So, and then once you know it, it influences every decision you make as to what you would include in your story. And just as important, what you don't include. Because if you're taking an experience from your life,
Yeah.
you have a lot of things you can include. I guess who doesn't want to hear everything?
Yeah.
Everyone.
Right.
Nobody wants to hear your entire life. So you have to make the choices. And one way to do that is to say, this is what the story is about. So I'm going to give you an example, and
Okay.
then I'm going to ask you to sort of brainstorm with us about your potential story. Okay? So I have a story about an experience in which, and maybe tonight I'll actually kind of tell it, but I want to talk about it. In which I went to the UNC hospital, and I spent a week there. Not the greatest experience. If I just tell you about that experience alone, it's an anecdote. I mean, it might be kind of like, oh, holy shit anecdote. But if I realized, here's the change part, man, my friends are more important to me than I thought. From that experience, now you've got a story. It doesn't have to be that mushy. It could be, I spent a week.
More your friends what now?
So for example, if I realized that after staying for a week at the UNC Psych Center, man, I really miss my friends.
Okay.
They're a little more important to me than I thought. Just one example. Okay? Now that's a starting point for a story.
You start with that.
I do, and I think most people that I hang with that are really good at this also do. Sometimes when they're putting the stories together, they're like, oh, actually no, it's a different story. And sometimes you find, so the example with the UNC Psych Center, when I first started trying to find the story about that experience, the story was that place sucks. That's a story. Because I didn't know that going in, and I left, I'm like, this place sucks. About a year later, someone challenged me, we were having this sort of activity of same set of incidents, same event, try to write a different story. See what you can do. So I spent some time with it, and there was a nurse who was really kind to me when the others weren't. And so I realized in that story, not everybody was treated. There are some good people in the world, right? Now, because that story changed, and that was the story, the change, that realization, that changed everything
How you prepared your story.
how I framed everything and what I chose to include. And it might have, in both of those stories, I might have had a scene in the ER. But they're gonna sound a little bit differently because they're leading to somewhere else.
Yeah.
So, that was a long-winded way of asking you, what might be a story you want to explore, starting with the change, not necessarily the events or the experiences.
You changed my story.
Good. So, let's talk about that. What might be a story you want, and for our purposes, you could do any kind of story, but I do tend to lean towards,
Well,
like, you're gonna die one day, let's get these stories out. You can talk about the story about how you realized strawberry was your favorite jelly bean
Yeah.
flavor, but let's get
but get a, okay.
I mean, if you're comfortable.
I am, but so,
You wanna take the mic?
do you want me to take the
Yeah,
mic?
let's see if we can work it out. You don't have to. And stop if that doesn't make sense, just
Yeah,
stop.
can I talk like,
Yeah, sure.
how close do I need
I don't know.
it to feel like it's mic'd? I know I was the one who said we should make sure this.
So the question was, what might be a starting point for your story? The starting point being how you changed.
Okay, so can I back up?
Yep,
Tell you why
yep,
what you just said made me
Yeah.
think
sure.
to change it. Okay. By way of background, I grew up in Bangkok, Thailand. So middle school years, age 12 to age 18. But I was what I now know is called a third culture kid, which fits me to a T, now that I know what it is. But essentially, someone who grows up outside of their own culture in the company of other people. So I was in an international school. And none of us were living in our own home culture. We were all away, but the third culture is the one that created sort of in the mix of people. And so that's part of the frame. And there's all sorts of stories from
Yep,
so I thought when we first, tonight, when you were suggesting, think of a story, there is a story I want to tell. But when you said the change bit, I'm kind of like, I don't know what the change is.
right. Which is where almost everybody is, and that's good.
Right.
That's where you start.
So maybe that's not the story. Or,
Well, what is the
so-
thing? What is the thing?
so here's the thing. Well, the background is, and I don't know to what degree, if I was telling a story, I would need to fill in
Right.
Bangkok.
Sure.
But for people who don't know, I can't think of the song right now, but from the Chess, the musical, One Night in Bangkok, it's a Hard Man Hungry, I think it is. I was a 12-year-old American girl who moved from DC into Bangkok, Thailand, where prostitution is illegal, but it is culturally accepted. And Bangkok and its a lot of cities in Thailand, there is a vibrant sex industry. And I grew up in a Catholic family that is very liberal from their own perspective, and I think they are, but they didn't know, we never really talked about it, right? The fact how shocking it would be for, my brother was 11 and I was 12. We were not allowed to go to the red light district areas, like lots of teenagers are not allowed to do X or Y or Z. And of course, if you want to, and you've got friends who make it possible, then you do get, if you're that type of person, right, you will go ahead. I was that type of person where, well, I'll back up. When I first enrolled in this school, they hold parent nights for people in this exact situation. And they asked the parents to prepare how they were going to discuss the sex industry. Good, bad, otherwise, what your decision is, make a decision. I think they had small groups of parents talk it out, right? And my mom and dad said, to this day, within the first year, everybody at their table said, no, we are not going to let our children go to Papong, which is the main red light district, but there's lots of, and we're not going to do it. We're not going to let them go to restaurants because that supports the industry. And there maybe were like I think 5 sets of parents. And my mom said within the first year and a half, they were the only couple that still had that rule. Because in my high school, when people said we're going out, it was this one bar, Goldfinger, in Pat Pong. So how am I not gonna go out on the weekends or whenever I get to spend the night at someone's house whose parents don't care? And so as a, not 12-year-old, but 13 and a half, 14-year-old, I was having opportunities to go grow up in like the Sextons and the experience of being, you know, also we tread a different line because several of us can speak Thai. We're too young, really, in some ways, to be there unless we are enrolled in the school. So we're not great clientele. I mean, we're taking business away from other, you know, tourists who might come and bid on the girls. And of course, I'm not thinking about that. I mean, I think it's subconsciously lodged, and years later, it is horrifying for me when I think about how, you know, part of my reality was, oh, I'm at the bar, I have to go to the bathroom, I wait in line with all of the girls and their numbers. Like they've got bikinis and then it's number, and that's how people order them, right? And the reality that it must have been for them to have these privileged white, whether you're white or not, but of privilege, third culture kid, usually of expat money, coming and just hanging out in their industry, where just because there is a vibrant sex industry does not mean people are there by choice. Some people are, but there's a whole undercurrent in Thailand and lots of places about engaging, lying to people and getting them to sell their children or loan their children to a sex industry that you can never get out of. So that was going to be the background.
All right, but then it changed.
Yes.
What?
Well,
So I said something about stories require change, which, by the way, they don't require it. It's just they are more engaging and more relatable, and they just work better. It's no one's got to. You don't have to do it that way.
Right.
But they're better that way by most people's standards.
No, that
Most
makes
people.
sense.
So, and it makes it much easier to graph a story, because right now you probably have just a lot of stuff. You
Oh, a
can't
lot of
figure out
stuff.
What to include.
This was not going to be my story.
Right, and even if you were a genius orator and wordsmith, there's a limit to what we're going to listen to.
Yeah.
I don't know what that limit is. For some people it's 5 minutes, for some people it's 10, some people can push 15. It is hard to keep our attention. And so, how do you choose what to include? And I think once you know the change, you can
Then
say,
you can choose
all that stuff actually, I don't, for this particular story,
Right.
I actually don't need that. I need this other stuff because it makes it tight. So what's
So the reason I started with the background is I think my change is exploring further the world and like that experience, because a couple years ago I had my 25th high school reunion. It was basically 9 of us getting together, and we talked about how fucked up it is.
Right.
That no, we didn't have classes that or anything that talked to us. Our parents didn't talk to us about sex in the way that like would help us process why it's okay for some people's dads to take their clients to Patwong when other people's kids can't go there that was going to be the background to a whole other story.
Right.
That I think I can't figure out in this moment what the change of that
Sure.
story is.
Right.
So I guess ideally I would want like a minute to figure out how to say what I just said.
Sure.
And then,
Oh, you're already crafting the story.
yeah,
I just want, what's the change? Start there.
well,
What might be the change? I think you probably have 15 stories
yeah, okay.
about your experience growing up in Thailand. You
Right,
have
but
so
that's
many
not the story. So the story I wanted to tell was how, as a group of us grew up in Bangkok and in this realm, you just sort out your own path, and which includes if you want to smoke weed or whatever outside, like go find a rooftop, Thailand is lax, but it's not that lax. Also, this is in a setting where people like me and other people whose parents' jobs were paying for their schooling. If you got caught with a drug in Thailand, your entire family could be sent home. So the risks, the stakes are really high.
Right.
And there was a time when a group of us, we went to a roof, and then, gosh, there was a guard there, and we went to another roof, and there's a lot of police out tonight. And we put it all together later, it's the end of the year, it's the end of the month, that's when the police are trying to get in all of make sure they've got their numbers up, right? But it was still, none of us picked up on maybe this is a sign. We go down one path and then keep encountering the law. Maybe we just don't smoke right now, right? And as we're moving momentum, we're gaining people, because they're like, oh, where are you going, right? So we end up being a group of 12 people, which also doesn't help. And we walked down a back alley and found this little courtyard, and we're like, oh, this would be perfect. So we all sat around in a circle, no one's gonna know. But of course, there's apartment buildings around, and 12 teenagers smoking in secret are not going to be quiet. And I don't know how long we were there, but my memory is we had just gotten settled into oh, we're hanging out, and then I see these flashlight, just the light, and then you hear the boots, and we're in a dead-end alley. And what we were seeing was a set of cops coming to check out what's going on here, because of course, somebody called it in, right? And although there's several of us that spoke some Thai, there was one person who was half Thai and was fluent, so she could translate. She would say something, we could sort of whisper around to understand what's going on. So that's how we learned that they did not have an available cop car to take us to the police station. So instead, they hired us tuk-tuks, which in Thailand is a taxi that's open air, kind of tricycle style taxi. And so they hired the tuk-tuks to take these 12 people to the police station. And of course, meanwhile, it's just I'm with people who were getting rid of the things out of the open air taxi, and also saying, Lucia, don't say anything, this is private, right? No, secrets, we're not gonna tell anyone, right? I think I was probably out of my mind at that point. I'm yeah. But what we did know, even in that circle that got passed around, I was the only American in that group, and I was the only one whose parents' job was tied to ramifications, like I just said. So it got passed around the circle that we, not all of us live here. Lucia's not American. They kept me out of it, theoretically. And then when we finally got to the police station, again, we're doing this circle talk, right? Whispering. And there's 12 of us sitting in a police station, and they're talking in English things like, ooh, you like the rats, right? You want to stay in the police cell? And, crying, being like, you smoked, didn't you? You smoked. I'm like, oh, no. And they get to me, and I'm like, oh, no. And everyone else is like, oh, no, she didn't. They're like, yes, you were, yes, you smoked. And ultimately, as I got a little bit more sober in that realm, I think the reality of what the hell are we doing here? And why did they just keep keeping us here? And I also had this level of well, it'll work out, that's my privilege speaking, right? But after maybe about an hour, the collective decision makers, were like, we just need to get a parent here with some money to get us out. And so then it was like, well, which parent do you call? And the one girl who spoke Thai, her stepdad was high up in the Thai military, so she can't. All of us, for sorts of reasons, couldn't be found out. And what happened was someone's mom's boyfriend came, and for about $60 to $80, got 12 of us out of a situation that could have been devastating should the consequences of the law affected me differently, and all of us. And we all walked away with this story, right, and this experience, and to be able to reflect and be like, wow, my heart was pounding, and I really remember the light and the boots, and
Remember the
this.
sensory stuff.
I do. I remember the bird that kept chirping, probably because we were being too loud, right? And part of the change is just the privilege, awareness as an adult. But even in that moment, we all knew this is like, I mean, it's cool. We got off for like $60 that somebody's mom's boyfriend paid. But it's not so cool.
So what is the change, you think?
Well, see, that's the thing. I'm in that story.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Right. Did you guys hear any change? Maybe as she was saying something, a possible change? Because I heard some stuff that's like,
Well,
maybe that's it, maybe that's it.
when you started talking about the different things that were going on in birds, and before that, you said there were some other, like, things you could imagine,
Mhm.
like, that really helped. Rather
Okay.
than just the verbiage, like the experiences that
So
hit you and
something-
affected you as they happened.
As they happen. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
sure.
Yeah.
You don't have to know it, just get to think about it.
Well, see, that's the thing. That's why I was thinking maybe this isn't my story.
Well,
Because I can think of other change
Sure,
in other experiences.
sure.
If you have some kids and you're trying to teach your kids a lesson, and you're gonna tell them a story, what do you think the lesson would be from the story? Like if
That's a
you,
great question.
Yeah, but I wouldn't tell this story to kids because it's
well, if
got content.
Oh, adults.
they're older,
Okay.
they're teenagers.
It's an education.
And,
Yeah.
and you're trying to teach them a lesson about something, and there's a moral of the story. What do you think it is? Like, is it, this is when I learned, and I learned to throw 1,000
Yes,
things out,
right.
and
Sure,
none of them were
sure.
good. You know, is it, you have to, be careful who you hang out with, or you have to, the world sees things different than you, and or is it that, especially when you're talking about the sex industry, like to me, that sounds like a very, very powerful revelation
Yeah.
about, so this might
Yeah.
be there too, but like for this one, is it that, is it something about law enforcement? Is it something about, your parents knowing what you're up to? Is it something about,
Right, okay.
And I'm curious about, and it's kind of connected, but the why behind it. Like, why did you, of all the things that you could have shared, you chose that, and I'm wondering why.
Because it stuck with me, and that's the other thing. Did it stick with me because it really was a traumatic experience? And also, it was one of those like, brush with danger
Right.
type experiences.
Sure.
And also, I think it's just been sitting in my head for so long, which is,
Right.
Well, was it a rush for you? I mean, maybe you were a girl and then you finally found yourself in a dangerous situation.
I didn't feel the danger because I think I was with all these other people.
Because you were what?
I was with all of my friends,
Okay.
and I think that was the thing. I mean, there was a fear initially when it was like, they're gonna call the police, they're gonna call the cop cars, and there's no way we can get out. Like, they were gonna put all of us in cop cars. In my reality, an American going to the police station, like, how do your parents not find out? How, in this case, did my parents' job not find out? So that was very frightening. But by the time I got to the police station, and perhaps the drug is settling in, and I'm hearing other people make plans about, like, we'll just say you're staying with us, then I was like, oh, I'll peace out with this conversation. I was no longer at risk. Like, the stakes weren't as high for me. And then I just sort of became an observer. And the fact that when we got let out, we all went back to one kid's apartment and smoked, is, that is not the result the police wanted to have. Or maybe it was, and they got $60. I mean, a lot of the takeaway for me was I had heard about sort of corruption, but never been obviously benefiting from it. There is no reason that 12 people in my situation in another country wouldn't have had their lives changed forever because they, ended up breaking a law and people making more of it.
Mhm.
So I would say only because of the things that you were saying made me think like the change, I mean, what we all talked about afterward, was like, man, none of us paid attention to the signs, right? We all kept saying it's so weird, there's so many police around tonight. And none of us said like, well, let's just go back to your house now. We didn't make the change, but none of us were surprised once it happened, even though if we thought about it, we never would have put ourselves in that situation. And also to think back, like we're trying to escape and we're like, oh, we'll go down this alley. That never occurred to any of us to look how we could escape, because I never thought we'd have
So
to.
you're just caught in the moment, really.
Yeah.
So-
How old were you when this happened?
I was 17, 18, probably. 17.
So one word that I use is the word realized. So I think it's helpful for me. X, Y, and Z happened.
Yep.
And I realized, and you might not use those words in the story, but for our purposes.
Is that the change piece? That's the change
That would
sentence?
be, and I realized whatever, that would be the starting point, that's change.
And then you build forward and backward and around that.
That's the next part.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's the change, that's the,
Once you know,
this
so,
happened, I realized this, that's this
Right.
change sentence.
right,
Or-
so,
okay.
and so I don't know if what I'm about to show you will help you with this, because I think it's help to figure out what that part is. And you have, I'm telling you for sure, you have many stories here.
Oh.
And one of the things that happens a lot
I
in
appreciate that.
the groups, and it happens to me all the time, it's very hard to see your own stuff, especially big stuff, like your mental health, the last 20 years, it's like, where do you even begin? It's almost always is you have more than one story you're trying to tell.
Sure.
It's very hard to figure out and commit to it. And then you do it, and you're like, oh, you know what? I'll put those stories over there, and I'll do those next time.
Right.
If you do more than one at one time, you're doing yourself a disservice. We're going to be a little lost. And whatever the main thing is you're doing is going to get compromised, because you can't do two things, you have to do one thing. So once I figured out in that story, I'll go back to that same story in the hospital. And not everyone sucks, and this nurse was a really nice guy. Well, that's where I end the story, or that's where I'm moving towards in the story. That's where it ends. This might sound rather obvious. If that's where I go to an end, then I can't start there. Because if I start there, there's no change, right? If I start there realizing there are some nice people in the world,
Oh,
and I end
gotcha.
there, there's no, you could do start there and then.
Or you could tease it.
Sure, you can play with it, but to simplify the process before you get make it a little more elaborate,
Right.
your end is if you realize that, man, there are some good people in the world. That doesn't mean my beginning is I think everyone's terrible, but I don't want to start there because
Yeah.
I'm going there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's a much easier path to start somewhere that you don't end. That's an arc, right? You heard the word narrative or dramatic arc, and people use that differently. But if I end figuring out that, man, there's at least one good person in the world that doesn't treat me like shit, which isn't exactly how it was for me, but for our purposes, then I don't start there. And where that arc is, and we can talk more about what that arc might look like for your particular story, that's satisfying for the audience, knowing that they're going on this thing.
Journey.
Without it, it's, we get lost, even in the most interesting or funny stories or anecdotes, call them what you want. They're really hard to keep our attention because we get lost. Where's she going? We want to know where you're going. So where are you going? You don't know where you're going, it's tricky. If you're, again, I say this a lot, if you're a brilliant orator or wordsmith, or perhaps the thing that happened to you was so just incredible and bizarre, maybe it'll keep us for a little longer, but not that long. I don't think you have much time before we got like,
Yeah.
maybe I have less patience
No, I
than the
think you're
people
right.
that you don't have, but it's not a hack. If we know what's going on, and we can talk more about it as I get, I want to hear what your thoughts are on your story. It's not a hack. It's not some it's straightforward stuff that people don't get right, which is a little snobby of me to say, but it's true. So they never get it right. They're trying to do all these weird things, deliver it in some incredible way. No, you're not. You don't have to deliver it in some clown way. You just have to know your change and then go towards there, and everything becomes so much easier. So that was a long-winded way of saying know your change.
Yeah, that's useful.
Do you have a thought?
He was, I mean, I don't know if
I'm
you
sorry.
said some stuff that was helpful for me.
I don't think it's, none of the things I said hit it though. Like I know there's something there deeper.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is yet. I'm still trying to process.
For her.
Yeah.
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 And what you said about the descriptors is, is both so obvious and I've forgotten. I mean, part of it is, I was trying to give you the background on this other thing, but I couldn't
Right.
tell the next thing until I gave you the background. But as I realized, as I'm telling you the background, I'm like, again, I know I've got a zillion stories right
Right.
there.
And if you ever are thinking, and then you can push back on anything I
Right.
say. This is my experience. If you ever have thinking, I need to tell you this thing before I tell you the story, check it. Rewrite your story. Whatever we absolutely need to know is in your story.
Okay.
And if it doesn't need to be in your story, promise you don't need it. Does that make sense? So,
Yes, so you don't try to figure out a way to put it in your story?
like, you need to know all this stuff about me before I tell you the story. In my mind, when you open your mouth, you started doing something. Call it a story or
Right.
whatever you're doing. If we need to know before, we either one, don't,
Mhm.
or two, put it in the story. And we
Right.
can get more into this when we get to the next part or the next part about scenes. A lot of people, I think, fall into this trap of thinking, I gotta give you all of this background information. Some of that might be very valuable for us to know in the story. But
Right.
you don't necessarily need to start with it.
Wow.
What you want to typically do is start with something that engages us.
Right.
And one way to do that, and we'll talk more about this after I hear about your story ideas, is scenes.
Okay.
Scenes, stuff is happening.
Yeah.
We're engaged in that. There's action. That's a good thing. If you go 2 minutes of background, and let me tell you about my life, my childhood, because then it'll make sense.
Yeah.
We're gone.
I understand that part.
Right.
I guess part of, for right now, that
Yeah.
I was sharing for you all is because I am hoping you can help me craft
Sure.
this better, right?
Sure.
And even just by telling it to you, that's what I was like, oh, duh.
Yeah.
There's all these other stories I haven't been paying attention to.
Yeah,
But-
you're like a solo show here. Like 10 stories you could do. For sure.
But I think it's funny, not so funny, that I needed to come have this conversation
Sure.
to be able to like allow myself to think of all those other change moments as stories. Because
Right.
you said, all of you, in some way, in terms of reflecting back about what I said in my experience, like
Mhm.
I can think of 10 things just in that bar that were
Right.
change moments. The one, specifically being in a bathroom with those women, or we used to get up on the bars ourselves and
Right.
dance, which now I look back and I'm like, oh my God, these women
Right.
were taking their money.
Right.
That was the other thing that my high school friends and I processed. No one told us about this. And we are just being wild, crazy kids because we can and it's cheap. And oh yeah, there's my science teacher.
Yeah.
That's also weird. There's a whole
There's a
lot
lot there.
Oh, yeah. You got
So maybe the
bad-
story I wanted to tell is not worth
So I will tell you this.
spending energy on
This
right now.
is a common thing.
Mhm.
And it's one of those things that I remind people, and they remind me, and we still we do the same thing as you've got a lot of stories,
Mhm.
and you cannot craft one story until you get clear on the story.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, your process might be a little different. I would say get clear on the story and then craft from that starting point. But you might be like, no, I want to start with the sounds, and you might be, that doesn't work for me. But if that's where you want to start, and then things get clear for you, and you could, then that's your
Well, I
process by all
appreciated
means.
knowing
Yeah.
that hearing the bird or doing the whatever made it real for you, because I realized that is the point of how you craft the story, right? Is how you create the imaginary experience in some
100%.
listener's head.
So one of the
So-
challenges I have with a lot of storytelling that takes place, the sort of broader speaking circuit, is they typically don't go deep. They just sort of, here's my childhood. I was raised by an abusive father, and it was really tough. I struggled with school when I was 13 years old. I learned that I had this stuff. But they don't go, they just sort of pop.
Okay.
So for me, it never feels like it's a list. And lists for me aren't very
That doesn't work. for you.
compelling. Right, so I think for me, stories that are particularly engaging and relatable and even memorable are not doing this, but they're doing that.
Yeah, okay.
And then how you do that is the craft. That's the conversation, and that's the,
Like not being linear.
not only linear, but just going wide and not going deep.
Oh, deep.
We want the
I was thinking top down.
So maybe my visuals. So I think there's a tendency for people to go wide or the
Okay.
breadth.
Cast their net.
Cast their
Okay.
net, tell you the whole life story, which is fine.
But
we don't really get to know much about you because if you've been alive for 40 or 50 years and you're trying to cover everything and you only have 5 minutes,
Right.
good luck. So the best stories are just take a moment, sometimes one moment, maybe a few moments, maybe a series of moments that took place over a year or two, and find the one change, which can be tiny.
Perfect.
It doesn't have to be that you realized you had privilege. It could be.
Yeah, or that's the background of it, but.
Yeah, it could be the tiniest little grain of some of the best stories I've ever heard. Just this little morsel of change, this little
Yeah.
awareness, like, maybe I'm not so smart after all. Just little stuff, or maybe whatever.
But are you ending your story with that aha? Or the aha shows up in the middle of the story?
Good question. So that's a style thing.
Okay.
So I think it's going to vary. You don't have to necessarily be that explicit about it. So some people in the storytelling world, when you're that explicit, they'll say it's a little heavy-handed.
Okay.
Trust your audience that they're going to get it.
Okay.
I would say, whether they get it or not, craft your story in a way where they have no choice but to get it.
Okay.
You did such a good job of crafting it that we understand what the change is,
But also seal the
even the
deal.
moral, if you want to call that, without you necessarily having to clobber us over the head.
Okay.
But there are storytellers who, just to be safe, will say, and I realized, and what the pushback they'll get often is, you didn't earn your ending. Like, you did all this thing and you realized that you wanted to leave your wife, for example, but that's not what your story was about. There's nothing about that. So it feels weird. It feels like, nah, it's actually not what
Right.
How
You
just-
right.
you just added the thing.
And I realized it.
And the thing that the way I sort of frame it is, it's not so much that stories require change, it's that stories are the change. That is what a story is.
Yes.
So if you have that in your head, it becomes this thing. You can do it from the start, throughout. You can have your moments. We'll get into this in a minute. Hopefully we'll have time. The moments that you want to use to illustrate, because you can't do everything.
Right. Yes, I got that.
So you have to pick the moments you want to illustrate that are showing this change.
Okay. Okay.
So all of a sudden, this anecdote of all these experiences, you're actually choosing the things that best illustrate the change, not coincidental.
Right. Makes sense.
Like the reason I'm putting this moment in here is because I know where the story's going.
Yes, that makes sense.
Right?
That makes
But
it
then
hard,
again,
right?
how
That
choose,
makes
do I want that bar scene or not? If I include the bar scene, why am I including the bar scene? It's not just because that's what happened, because a lot of things happen.
Right.
And you're not telling us everything.
Right.
I
right,
promise
right,
you, you're leaving a whole bunch of stuff
Sure.
out.
Yes, right.
What happened the moment after you were on the bar? You didn't tell us
Yeah.
that.
Right.
So you're always choosing what to sort of,
Sure.
you're compressing and illustrating. You gotta make those choices.
Yeah.
But the only way to do that without going absolutely loony is to know where it's going. Like knowing where.
Okay.
So for
Combining
our
your-
purposes-
combining your own memories and stories for the change moments.
100%. And for our purposes, to sort of simplify it, yeah, that's your end. Once you get comfortable with that stuff and you want to play with that, sure. But like, let's simplify it. Yes, that's the end. And I realized X. Now, where are you starting and how are you getting there? Done.
Yeah.
Simplify.
Cool. That's helpful. Thank
Yeah.
you, team.
And there's a million ways to tell stories, and people will say, oh, that's just so simplified. It is. But building blocks, building blocks, building blocks. And then you want to make it fancier or you want to make it more elaborate, cool. But if you don't have change, it gets hard.
So the question for simplicity versus, it seems like simplicity also, to some extent, could equal going wider versus deeper. So if you simplify it to the point where you're just trying to kind of knocking things off the list, you don't want to do that, but at the same time, you got to be careful as how much detail you go into certain parts. So which
Right.
parts of that story are actually going to support your change?
Right.
Like, that's a challenge I have. Like,
100%.
how much does this put in here?
Right. So the question of detail, hey,
I thought listening for me.
Yeah, yeah, so
I'm done moving shit.
there's no answer that I have that's going to be like, oh no, you should do that because that's absurd, right? It depends, but I think one of the conversation I have is maybe more than others. What are we including? What are we not including?
Yeah.
How much detail are we including?
Right.
And what are we not? And I would say it is a tricky one, and you've got to try it out and get some feedback. But respectfully to some coaches out there who say, you know, we want all the detail, we want to know how to have all this. I would say, is it really serving that change? So to give a real clear example and an obvious one, if you're in a car with your girlfriend and you ask her to marry you, the color of the car doesn't matter. Now, if the story is about that you love your blue car, then it matters. If you just happen to be in a car You don't need, and not only do we not need it, you have a finite amount of time.
Right.
And so why would you be including stuff that we just don't need to know? And more so, you're kind of getting us off the main thing.
Right.
Why are you planting in our head a blue car unless we need to know it's blue? Even more so, it's better when we decide what color it is. That's what makes a great story. So that the magic spot, which
So they can visualize it for themselves.
yeah. So what do you include and what do you not? So you activate my imagination. That's when your story becomes my story. That's fucking magic. And there's no right answer. Anybody who says there, I mean, how would you know? But
Right.
there's a sweet spot. I'm giving you enough so you know my story, and I'm activating some of your stuff. Right? I tend to go a little bit less on detail than other people, certain kinds of detail. That's a good question. That's a good question.
Well, because I wonder, like, if you're trying to make it real for someone and get them there and experience it with you, like, what's that level of detail that is too much, that's overwhelming and insignificant? What is helping them visualize it for themselves so they can experience it with you? Like,
Yes.
that seems.
But do you have a specific example in mind for your
Well, like,
stuff?
so for instance, I was in a motorcycle accident, and this is a
Give him the
story.
mic.
Yeah, so.
Is it reach?
Yeah, kind of. All right. So this is a story I'd like to develop that, and I think there's a change.
Yep.
And I'll just give you the overview
Sure.
of the story, but this is where I don't know what to do for details. So like, 1999, one night, I'm on a motorcycle, going around a right-hand turn, and an oncoming SUV running me off the road. Crashed, dislocated my hip, had a bunch of road rash, and so after I was in the hospital for like a week, I go see the doctor, and he's telling me like, okay, well listen, it was really bad, we needed 4 guys to pop your hip back in, and you're definitely gonna, well I can't say definitely, you're most likely gonna need a hip replacement, for sure. You may even need a hip fusion. What's a hip fusion? Is like, well that's when we fuse your hip at like a 25-degree angle for the rest of your life. I'm 26 years old. And he's like, and if we don't need hip fusion, we'll definitely need a hip replacement, like I said. And quite frankly, the technology's not there, and you probably need one every 10 years or so because you're active, you're young, and it doesn't. And I'm like listening to all this, and he's like, and even if that's not the case, and you're like the 1 in a million, you're gonna have debilitating arthritis, like probably in the next 5 or 10 years, you'll be on meds the rest of your life. The doctor's telling me this, and I was like, dude, I went home and I cried, I was in denial, I couldn't walk, I was on crutches, I had a huge brace. And then, so I started doing all this research, and I started doing my own research, like I'm working on Medline, and researching like, he said I had avascular necrosis, which basically means my bone died because the blood flow was cut off because my hip was dislocated so badly. And so I did my own research, and then I saw like, yeah, this happens to 99%, and I'm like, I'm gonna be the 1%. And so I remember, I'm like, screw that guy, this is kind of the change. I'm like, screw that guy. I'm not gonna let some doctor tell me what I'm gonna do with my life. I'm gonna be disabled, really. So like the next day, I get on my crutches and I walk. My mom's boyfriend. This is an insignificant detail, as I hear myself telling it.
Yeah.
We live in the lake, so I walk out to his dock and I put my crutches down. And I just flopped off. I couldn't lower myself. I flopped off the dock into the water, and I swam with one leg and tried to kick I couldn't walk because I couldn't put any weight on my hip. I went like 10 feet, came back, I was exhausted, killed. Next day came back, 15 feet. Next day, and one day at a time, then I started getting back into the gym, and like this is a period of months. Like this is, and to this day, literally, so this was 99, so literally 20 years ago, and I haven't had any problems.
Wow.
And I've squatted 500 pounds, and I've run 10 miles, and I've done all these things, and I want to find this guy and say, screw you. And and like, so here's it, and not to say that I won't, I've been blessed, but at the same time, how many people would hear that and let that diagnosis get planted in their mind, and they're like, I'm screwed, like, why even try, why would I even, so that's a story that I've had, and I feel like there's some lesson there, like, of, I don't know if it's about listening to an expert, or not accepting.
Or you trusting
Trusting
yourself,
yourself.
Well,
Yeah.
and also, what's the change? Let's start there.
I think it's the realization that nobody can you can defy the odds. You can be the 1 in a million. You can decide that you're gonna be, and then if you're committed to it, that's how you become the 1 in a million. It's not because it happens to you, it's because you make it happen.
right, yeah, to make
So something along those lines, I don't know.
I'm not the gatekeeper, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a conversation. Yeah,
So that's something I feel like it could be a good story.
it could be an amazing
Yeah,
story.
for sure.
So.
What are your questions about it that you had, other than sort of detail and?
Yeah, like, so how much, so what's, where am I, like, in the narrative, like, yeah, so there I was going, like, you know, how do I describe, I see the headlights coming at me, and it's from this huge, you know, full-size SUV.
Yeah.
I wait, you know,
Right.
I remember being on the ground, and the ambulance guy, I woke up, obviously blacked out, the ambulance guy, I woke up, the ambulance guys were over me, and like, I just felt pain, like, everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, like, what's
These are great questions, man, because I think it's a little bit trial and error, a little bit, and you're gonna have different audiences. But I wanna ask you a question in response to your question is, if you asked me about any story I've ever told, at least in the last couple of years, let's say, when I started really diving into it more, I would be able to tell you, even if you hated the story, the reason that's there is because of this reason. There's a reason it's there in that part of the story. There's a reason I'm including it. And so are you asking, are you not sure if it serves the end?
Yeah.
Slash the change, or it does, but I have to limit, I can't include everything.
The only, I don't care much that serves the change, except me deciding, screw that, I'm not gonna be that guy, and I'm not gonna live, I'm 26, I'm not gonna have my whole life ahead of me
Right.
like this. But everything else is just like, what happened?
Well, can I point something out
Yeah.
right here? The story's over before the story's over. Because you're saying that the change is that you weren't gonna listen to the doctor. But the way you told it here, I know you're just playing, about a third of the way in, you'd already figured that out. So after that, the story's kind of over, and it's just, let me tell you, it's a coda. This is what happened after. So it gets hard to know what to include, because your story's actually ending before it's over.
So you're saying by my actions, I'm telling people what I already started to believe, that I can, like,
So you're saying that the story, we're getting very specific with what the change is, that the change is that, and if I'm wrong, you know, tell me that, I realized I didn't want to follow the doctor. Or, put it in other words,
yeah, like I could shape my own destiny, and somebody else wasn't gonna do that for because they have a degree or.
yeah, 100%. Now you realize though, when you get to a certain point, about halfway through, we know exactly where you're going, right? For better or worse.
Mhm.
I would say for worse, for most stories, because this is again, and again,
You've also likely walked up on stage or.
we know you're okay, and that could be fine. I push back on some of these
Okay.
hero stories, because we know you're here, you're great,
Yep.
you're fucking awesome, great, right? Nothing wrong with them, I mean, a lot of people love them. But I think there's a real opportunity for, and you go there, but you're willing to go there with the vulnerability of being really scared, right? But you go, I think, I'm not trying to edit your story at all, but just what I heard. Does that make sense that if the story is the change, and it doesn't have to happen at the end, but it's happening, yours gets cut off. You figure it out about a third of the way through. And then the rest is the fight and the struggle.
Build
But we know where it's going.
Yeah.
So I think you do yourself a little bit of disservice in the world of story and keeping our attention, because we know where it's going.
So
We don't know
would
all
you
the
say-
details of where it's
Yeah.
going. 500 pounds or 400 pounds, you squat it, but we know.
So would you say like, and so, being it 20 years ago, it's probably easy for me. It's like, I'm not saying my memory serves me right, but
Yeah,
maybe,
that's fine.
maybe it was like, maybe with decision, would I still give away the story if I said I was gonna do everything I could? Maybe I didn't know if I'd succeed, but I knew the options.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
Because that leaves a little bit of like
Right.
more
So,
suspense.
yeah, so one of the things that I think a lot of people, for lack of a better word, mistake, it's not really a mistake, is there's no tension in their story. The tension dies early in the story, and it just sort of floats along, and we lose us. So it doesn't have to be life or death, but you need tension. So one way to do that is the uncertainty. Everything else is still happening the way you told it, but just one thing that's helped me is almost a formulaic thing: is this happened, that happened, I feel. You wouldn't necessarily do this throughout your story, but it's to remind you what we really care about, most people, is less about what happened and more about how you feel about what happened.
Yeah.
And it forces you to think, okay,
Because that's relatable.
accident happened,
Yeah.
talk to the doctor, here's how I'm feeling. It's just a good reminder of this, that, feel, this, that, feel. And you get into this thing, and you do some of that. You were very clear about how you feel. I think you, yeah, I don't want to be the guy who's like, no, don't do it that way. But halfway through, I wasn't really paying attention.
Yeah.
I was, because I like you and I'm here.
Yeah. But you already knew the end.
Yeah,
Right, so that's
You're
going
awesome.
in, like,
You're a fucking awesome guy. You're a beast.
Right.
I know.
So,
And that's what you're gonna tell us in the next 2 minutes, which is fine. In some circles, they applaud you all day long. I know that. So, you know, your audience matters.
I think it matters.
Yeah, and people, yeah, it's hard. People aren't gonna say, at least in my experience, I was a little bored.
Yeah,
They're never gonna say that,
yeah,
right? So, it's tricky to know.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's valuable, thanks, man.
No, but let's keep talking about it because.
I want to
this.
say
All
something
right.
that I liked, specifically the fact that you chose, however, you know, if you end up going with the story, there were a few times, like I needed to know how bad, how high the risks were. And I'm someone who feels also from someone describing their pain, I feel it, which may not be, I mean not, it just makes me cringe.
Yeah.
But that to me is engaging me in your story.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be gory. It just, this, and it helped me that you took 20 seconds about like, you know what, when you discovered there was an aortic, you were tapping it right here, but it helped me that you interrupted the story to just give a couple bullet points.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what this means. That, you know, I lost blood to my leg and so da-da-da-da. And then you could move on. I didn't need any more details, but I did need that.
It's interesting, right? So some people will cringe. You don't know who's in your audience.
No, I'm
But,
not saying the cringe. What I needed was the medical explanation. I liked the cringe. The cringe got me into it. But I didn't necessarily
You
need
didn't
more
understand.
medical. I didn't need more stories in the hospital. But the breakdown explanation because I'm not a doctor.
Well, let's go a little bit deeper with that. Why did you need that?
Because that's not my knowledge base.
Can I offer something that might have been happening, and if it's not true? For some people, it's a thing of controlling people's wandering minds. So if you open up with something that I might be thinking, oh, what is that? I'm not listening. How do you keep my attention? So if you start with something, and medical is often an example of, and you don't know, I mean, it's 100 people, you can't guarantee it, but you want to hedge your bet a little bit. So if you start with something that people are going to wonder, oh, wait, they're not listening, right? So how do you deal with that? Maybe that's one way to deal with it. I'm going to give you a little bit so that you're not going over there. I need you to be here with me right now.
Interesting. Okay.
So, again, that's, I think,
Yeah.
kind of higher level stuff, but all these things add up from it being like, all right, I'm listening to like, holy shit, I'm not, there's no way I'm not listening to what's happening right now. It adds up.
Big difference, yeah.
It adds up.
Yep, yeah.
And I also think you've got multiple stories in that story, right?
If you had 7 minutes max to tell that story, which is probably enough to tell most stories, could you do it?
I think so.
And I'm gonna segue, and then I want to give you the mic if you're comfortable talking about it. You have a story idea, so you know the change, or maybe you don't. You're just playing with it, and the change is the end. Again, you don't have to be explicit about it, and you're not going to start there. Because if you start there and you don't have a story, you might have something, you're just not going to call it a story.
Okay.
You call it something else. And now this is the next sort of part I want to talk about, which you both did beautifully, which is scenes. So stuff is, scene, by definition, a scene is, think of a movie, right? There's a reason why movies usually start with something happening and not a lot of background stuff, because after, you're like, I don't care, what's happening? I want action. Scenes are usually set in a location, or a specific location of some kind. It's happening in a place, in the world. You're not in some abstract. Usually in a time, we may know the time, we may not. And they are all serving the change. So for your story, which might be harder to ask about because you're not as clear on it maybe.
I'm not, but I am clear now the pathways to go explore some of those things.
So the question I have is what would be, and I think you did it, what would be the scenes you would choose to best illustrate your change? And let's say this, in 7 minutes, you could have a bunch, but from what you said, maybe you need 5 or so, not to limit you, but, so could you choose?
5 or so what?
Like scenes.
Scenes.
And I can, to me, a scene changes when, one, you're in a different location. Perhaps when another person comes in, it changes the sort of nature of it, but they're all intentional.
But is a mindset shift a scene change?
Not for me.
Okay.
not for me. But for our purposes, like, stuff is happening A, then it goes to B, then it goes to C. We don't have to worry about how you link them in the transitions just yet. You do have to know about it, but like, what's happening in the story? Why are you doing that one first, and that one second, and that one third? You know? These are choices. So, given that you are probably the closest to having a formed story, what might be, and it might have to go backwards, but what might be your scenes?
Probably the accident itself, the side of the accident. The doc, I think I could probably skip over the, unless I want to make a joke, because this had happened, like, they cut my clothes off and I had no underwear on, my mom was there. So that was.
Can be
That's a
good.
detail that would be.
That is good sometimes.
Yeah, I was like, good God.
One of the things I've heard, one of the things that
Your mom was the first one to know your junk.
Yeah, she's like, she doesn't care.
It's been a hard pill for me to swallow. That's because I tell a lot of like sort of heavy stories that there are moments of that go a long way and make it even stronger, so for sure.
So, well, and then I don't think a whole lot happened in the weekend hotel, so I'm sorry, the hospital. I'd say the doctor's office where he's giving me my diagnosis, my prognosis. And then I do remember the moment, like, you know, I was sitting on the edge of my bed crying, and I remember specifically, you know, thinking the rest of my life like this. So that may be one, and then like probably we're out swimming maybe.
What's the change in your words exactly? Specifically, if you can. And if you don't know, just throw out some ideas and maybe we'll play with it. Because if you know it specifically, it really helps.
I mean, its most basic function, I think, is like, don't let anyone else tell you what you can do.
No, we're just talking about your life, not about other people's lives. What was the change for you? Is that what you realized in those words?
That I wasn't going to let anybody else decide what I could do, could or couldn't do, what I was capable of, or you know, regardless of what others' opinion.
Cool, so if you can't, so just for our purposes, and the way we're doing story here,
Yeah.
if you can't start there, where are you starting? Not scene-wise, emotionally. You can't start there.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have a story.
Right.
Where are you starting?
From like that, you just, you know.
You had an accident, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So this, that,
Are you
feel.
saying mentally where am I starting?
So this, that, feel. You had an accident. How were you feeling? As best you can recall. I mean, your memory's
Yeah,
great.
my life's over.
Great. I mean, not great.
Yeah.
All right. So if you go from my life's over to where's the end? What did you say? Just like 10, 20 seconds ago?
Swimming, or the.
No.
And then I'm not going to let anyone tell me what I can or can't do.
And is your life over?
Nope.
All right, so that's an arc. That is a very clear. So now think about what scenes serve that the best. There's some stuff we probably don't need to know. What scene serves it? So it's from this accident, and if I get this wrong, you know,
Yeah.
I have an accident. I think my life is over. I end here with my lifestyle. I actually think, and I'm going to be, this is me like inserting myself in your story you didn't ask. For me, it's a more powerful story that you actually end with the realization, and the extra stuff you can add, but all the you beating life might be another story. I think it's a really powerful story that you just get to that. And then you can decide, we want to see Jason sort of go from, my life is over. It could have been an epiphany in that moment. Chances are it wasn't. I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. I think.
And those might be the scenes that you choose to illustrate, maybe not over. It's over, maybe not over. Maybe not over. You know what I mean?
Well, and looking back truthfully, I think for years after that, I was waiting for something to happen. I was waiting for the pain in my hip. I was waiting for an issue. I was waiting to go back for a checkup and have an issue. And then finally, I was like, screw this. It's been 10 years.
That's useful context. I mean, I find it.
Yeah, those are some of the tricky choices you make, right, with crafting the story. I just think that it's a beautiful story and that people tend to rush through some of this stuff, and the stuff that really we connect with, I think I can speak this as a universal thing, is the stuff people tend to rush through. So one of the things I often suggest, and I try to do myself, is stay in moments. Rush through them. I was at the hospital, I was scared out of my life, and then I was home and said, whoa, dude, maybe we want to hang in the hospital for a little bit. What's going on? And then we talk about, well, how do you stay in the moment longer? Sometimes it's sensory stuff. Sometimes it's dialogue. That's a moment, dialogue, right? Sometimes an underused thing that people, I think could do better is, what are you thinking? Internal. What are you feeling internal?
What's going
What's going on? Slow it down. You hear really good speakers too, and storytellers. They usually slow it down. You are listening to me, and I'm going to go really deep down into this moment. I was scared, and you know the show don't tell thing. So one way that I'm sort of tangenting here. I apologize. Is you were scared? Great. That's something. And I have my own idea of scared, and that's cool. I'm meeting you where you are. But what's that like? What's that like to think that you're not going to be alive? Because there are people out there that would resonate with that. But if you rush through it, maybe they do a little bit, but they could more.
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
Plus it shows some.
And yeah, you're not going to
vulnerability.
remember everything, and I believe you have artistic liberty to play a little bit as long as the emotional truth is the same. I don't say lie, but
Right.
it's a story, and the emotional truth is the same, and that means that you have to stay in the hospital 2 days longer for the sake of the story. That's fine. That's my take. And
Now I have a question that is just as, well, is it a bad idea, say, for him to start with the moment with his mom and start the story there?
what's the moment with his mom?
No, the fact that
So I was in the emergency room. Like,
they
well,
just stripped my clothes off.
So can I just say this one thing and then I'll
Yeah.
shut up? This is maybe the thing that is the hardest thing to figure out. If
Okay,
it's not where to end,
it's where it starts.
it's where to start.
Okay, so it's not an off-the-wall idea
No.
to start there.
Not at all.
With her story, I almost thought there we were down the end of dead end alley. The footsteps are coming close to us. We saw the flashlights. Like I'm like that.
What, in one word,
Is how it should
states.
start it.
Right?
That
States.
all of a sudden grabbed my
States.
attention. Yeah.
States.
Well, so that's what's funny. I'm so glad to hear you say that, because that is, if you had just tossed me up and
Yeah.
I knew I had a time limit,
Right, you do.
I would have started with that, because
Right.
that's the image I've got, and I even remember, and all of us talked about it later,
Right.
that we will remember that.
Right.
The lights, the boots.
It's great.
So I'm glad to know that that's where it hit
100%.
you.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that was captivating.
So could you start there? Sure, you could.
So it's
You don't have to. I mean, I'm stating the obvious here, but I think default, go chronological, just as a default. But does that mean you have to start it? No.
right.
I think that some of the best stories I know, they're starting towards the end. They loop back. You gotta get a little more clever with your transition so you don't lose us when they're popping around in time.
Right.
Right? Naturally, it's a little bit easier for our brains to follow it.
Yeah.
But 100%.
But also, you just
Start
said
at the end.
something like, I could start with that and not end with the jail cell. I could start with, that image and go back into my experience of learning from being out at those bars, right? I never even have to do, because the powerful thing for me was that experience of like, we were doing something we were supposed to be doing, and we were gonna get caught.
Right. It still just comes down to what's about. And then you can make those decisions.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure you can still tell it anecdotally, it's very interesting, but for
I
our
don't
purposes-
think, yeah, so.
But it does become hard to figure out, even when you were just casually saying it to us, that was a lot of information.
I know, I'm sorry, you're right.
No, that's a perfect point to make. It's like, what do you include?
Yeah.
And if you don't have, without knowing the change, how do you begin to
Pay attention.
know what to include?
Yeah, okay.
And what's not to include? It's just, everything matters. But for us, listening, it's like, no, it doesn't.
What were you wearing?
Oh, yeah.
Were you dressed up or?
I'm sure I was not super dressed up. Dressed up enough that I would feel comfortable sitting on the street. But probably had
You wanna know
put
more?
makeup on and,
Yeah, I just wanna know
yeah,
more, yeah.
right, those, like that mentality, that's
Just to
because.
picture it, just to picture it.
Well, and also because I know, it's funny because I hadn't thought about that, but that is, a lot of 17-year-old girls are paying attention to that. I'm sure I was on that night too. And that makes it more relatable, or,
Right. Choices.
choices.
A lot of choices. So do you have an idea for a story?
Well, first of all, when you were telling your story, it made me think about, my brother, actually, his girlfriend was a model, and she was an actress, and she was in Thailand, and did a movie.
Oh, wow.
She played the wife of this character who got involved with a prostitute. So, that made me think of that.
Oh,
And then
interesting.
the other thing is, I used to work on a hotline for HIV, AIDS, and STDs.
Yeah.
Because of course we're talking about sex, and of course there are a lot of experiences, crazy experiences that went on there, and I have friends that we, will talk about, oh, remember, the ice cream guy, or we have people that would call constant, like all the time, and tell us the same scenario and ask us for, such funny stuff, and people jerking off, and they're talking to you, just incredible crazy stories. And then when you're telling your story, I had an experience where I had a horse when I was a teenager. I was like 13, and the horse reared up and fell back on top of me. And so that was a huge experience, very scary, and of course then in the hospital. And then I know you were mentioning being in the hospital, and first I was thinking about a regular hospital. I'd gotten my colon removed, and I had to be in the hospital for 5 days.
Yeah.
But of course I've been in several psychiatric hospitals, and maybe I could do like a comparison, like
You could. I would still
But I don't
challenge
know.
you to find the change in one of those stories.
I know, I'm just sort of
Because
saying
it
that.
is-
I've never, well, no, I mean, I do certainly when I speak.
Sure.
I can tell you generally how it goes if that's okay.
Give her the mic.
Sure. Okay, so normally I just start off talking about my first hospitalization. Sometimes I'll talk about my diagnosis first, because we have people from different diagnoses they deal with. And so there's some like education
Sure.
involved in it.
Sure.
But as far as the experience, I was 19 years old and sophomore in college. It was during rush week, and we were rushing the girls, and I was in a skit for the thing, and I was supposed to play a lifeguard. It was like a girly thing about, it's supposed to be a comedy, and we were singing song, I don't know, but I guess I don't really have a lot of detail, but what I do say is that all of a sudden, that someone was criticizing my performance, and I ran upstairs, and then I was just totally out of it. And wasn't making any, I was speaking gobbledygook, and I was totally out of it. It happened in like 5 minutes. I do explain more about what happened next, but I guess a lot of times, I start off there, because it was the first and the worst. And I do mention, different places that I've been in Raleigh hospitals. Of course, I've been in other ones too, but for my 20s and 30s, I had several hospitalizations. I stopped having issues in like my mid-30s, and then just like 2 years ago, after being fine, out of the hospital anyway, for 20 years, I had another one. So the thing I guess I'm kind of looking for help with, I guess, is when I was there speaking one time, I went to my car afterwards, and on the way, when a police officer from a car started yelling at me, he said, "You're crazy," like really loud.
After you told your story?
Yeah, afterwards. So I didn't know if I was going to continue or exactly, how to look at that. And since then, too, with the way that cops have been treating black men, I started to feel uncomfortable about sharing. So I guess my thing is, whenever I'm talking, it's what kind of audience.
Sure.
And you guys seem pretty cool, I guess, but of course I am kind of concerned about the camera and everything.
And we can turn it
Yeah,
off.
don't worry about that.
Okay.
We won't do this.
Okay, because, yeah, I guess, I mean, I'm gonna do it. There's times when I don't, I just say, not this month, not.
You're talking about for nanny?
For NAMI, yeah, because they have these classes like every couple of months, I
Right.
guess, for the different police officers. But I did share with the NAMI guy that leads what had happened to me. I didn't tell him immediately, but I did eventually tell him. And I didn't tell him because I didn't really want to sort of really absorb it or accept it. But when I did, he reminded me that what I was doing was really helpful to so many officers. But it just depended on the group, and sometimes I felt like they were receptive and they were really listening. Other times I got kind of that feel of, well, oh, I shouldn't even mention this. The whole point of this is crisis intervention
Right.
training for these cops.
Right.
What do you do when someone's in crisis? And there's been a couple of times when I was out of it and just wandering around, and someone called about me, and then the cops came, and I had a bad experience and a good experience. The good experience, they helped listen to me, talk quietly, explained everything, spoke quietly, and treated me with respect. He also only got my hands behind my back, can't think of the word, cufflinks, whatever, what are they called?
Handcuffs.
Cufflinks. And then the other time, it was 2 cops, and they were real aggressive,
They escalated.
and they both were really like manhandling me, and they actually, not only did I get the handcuffs, I got the ankle cuffs, and really the only thing I was afraid of was having to go to the hospital. But I also felt like these guys are gonna kill me. When I got in the car, they started laughing to themselves. You don't have to be paranoid to feel paranoid in that situation, but I was paranoid. So it was like horrible. And took me to the different hospitals. When you're in the hospital, there's a lot of shit that goes on. It's really weird, and if you're not totally cognizant and with it, you don't know if you can trust your memories sometimes.
Yeah.
But I had some really shitty, experiences. I could usually tell somewhat if a person was actually cared, like you mentioned. But it just depended on how I was doing. But one thing I had thought about was, I don't know if any of y'all have ever seen anything on Netflix. It's called The Good Place. Anything else seen that? Okay, well, it's about people that are characters that are in sort of like not hell or heaven, but the Catholic. Yeah, they're in purgatory, right. But it's this sort of supposed to be sort of a wacky, funny, show. But they're trying to get to heaven, and sometimes they're not sure where they are, and things flip all the time. And anyway, I was watching this show before I got sick, and once it happened, I really felt like I was in hell. And I could not get out because, it's a locked ward, and so there's a lot of material there, so to speak.
You have a lot.
But I guess I'm just sort
It's
of
great.
like,
I mean, wow. You had
yeah.
said about 5 minutes ago, the question I have is, the
Yeah.
reason I came is, and I don't know if you finished that thought.
Well, the question is, I guess maybe it's a personal one, but I tend to try to make people laugh at stuff because relax, maybe.
Yeah.
And so, you know, is it still funny? Because with cops the way they are, and I actually do fundraising for the Democrats, and so there's a lot of stuff that's going on that I'm not happy with. So by sharing with someone, and I'll laugh, like I'll say, you know, oh gosh, one time I was actually in Italy when I got sick, and so I was in Venice, and I ended up, you know, I talked, oh, you know, I was going on a boat, and we went, you know, and the hospitals are really better there, you know, like they'll give you coffee, and like I didn't know Italian, so I spoke in Spanish, and I was like, you know, cafe, por favor, you know, and stuff, and they had a little cat, a sweet little cat, and you know, as opposed to what kind of experience, you know, you might have here, where you're tied to the bed. I mean, in the beginning, I was leather straps, you know, around my legs, and yeah, so I've had like a long experience in that. Oh gosh, I'm just babbling now. I'm just
Stories.
When you're talking about change and stuff, as listening to you, I'm not hearing a change from necessarily from your perspective, but I'm listening as an audience member,
Right.
and I'm thinking, we're all human. Like, we don't, let's look at each other as a human, as a person. And I'm, you know, like I hear about some of the behaviors from like this stuff, and it's just like, it's horrible. Like, how can we do that? And like, so I feel like you're really, really forcing people to be introspective. Like, hey, have I looked at a situation or had something happen where I was so quick to judge or be mean or insensitive, or, you know, because this is an extension to the thing I've seen before, like how everybody has a story, you just don't know it, so be careful and be kind.
Right,
But-
right, absolutely.
But yours is like really like so powerful that I think,
And she didn't need to really tell you this. Like,
yeah,
you just did it.
you just came out, and I
Connected
just felt like I'm listening, I'm feeling it myself. Like, so, I think so. Yeah, you have a lot of things. that you
Yeah.
share.
I think maybe, I'm thinking if I just let them know, maybe before I speak, that I do have reservations about sharing some of this because of the political climate, and because of the fact that someone did yell at me.
I was wondering if you could just start with
Maybe.
she yelled at you, because that to me was
Why
super
do
shocking.
you want, I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, I'm just curious,
No.
why do you think that you need to sort of qualify it?
Oh, you mean as far as that a cop had said that to me when I was
Or that
leaving?
you're
Hesitant?
hesitant to share it? I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, I'm
Yeah,
curious.
normally I just launch into it, and I'm sort of like, who cares? I have this sort of feeling, I mean, in general, I feel like, I'm just telling the story, I mean,
Right.
and people need to know, they need to know about this shit,
They
and
can
they need to know
decide for
what it's
themselves.
like, and if this is gonna help them treat someone better and not freaking put the cup, on their
Yeah.
legs, I mean,
Right.
I don't know, I guess I'm just sort of
It might
like,
depend on your audience, right?
yeah, and
The
they
thing
just
is-
show up, so.
To me, and this is just me, when you say I'm hesitant to share, but you still share,
Yeah,
that's a very intentional move.
right,
You're still gonna share,
right,
but it's like, how am I trying to frame or position this by saying that? This is sort of meta, I guess. So if there's a reason why you're trying to maybe gives you a little space and they're more likely to listen,
it's kind
sure.
of like this too, it's like, I don't have to give them every detail of my damn experience, but I also want them to know, like, hey, like, I'm one of you guys, like, I don't know, I'm married, I have a dog, I like to sing, I sing in the choir, I like Netflix, whatever, stuff like that, but I don't really think that's, I don't think I should have to go through that, but sometimes some of these cops, I just feel like they're,
Yeah,
Are people made to go to these trainings,
yeah.
or is it self-selected?
they actually choose to get the training.
They
So
probably
I'm
still have
still
like X
stuck
number
with
of
that,
hours
I'm
they have.
What is
still
it
stuck with
after
the
this
cop
report?
that was,
But it's, I mean, it's,
like, there's something in that for me. He chose to come and see you, and he could have said nothing, and his reaction after
Who? I'm
hearing
sorry.
the cop that called you crazy.
okay, well, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm still stuck with that you shared whatever you shared at a place that cops are choosing to go to, and that how you were treated afterward.
Yeah, that's a one-off, isn't it? I mean, that could be, and
But
who knows
that-
why, right?
But that is what, at least what I'm hearing from you, is why you are sort of protecting yourself with the frame.
Okay, fair
Well, it
enough.
was funny, see, after that happened, I mentioned that someone asked me, and I said, what, anybody questions, you know, any questions at all? I'm like, this person said, what triggered you? And of course, that's just sort of a psychobabble kind of question, but anyway, I just said, well, you know, I don't really like when people call me crazy.
Right.
Now, if someone, you know, if you're black and somebody called you nigga, if they were black too, you might be cool with that. Just as if I was someone with mental illness and we're talking about being crazy, that would be cool.
Right, it's, my community can call me crazy, but you random jerk can't do that.
You got there's a lot there, yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
But it's awesome that you're willing to talk about it.
I know.
And
Yeah,
thinking
I
it's
just
good,
know-
how much time do they give you to usually do this?
You know, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes or
Right,
so.
so you
Yeah,
have the
we-
same
there's
challenge that
like
other people
4
have,
of
it's like
us,
5 minutes.
Right.
But,
You can't do everything.
You know, they'll let you go on a little bit
Yeah.
sometimes, but normally I'm fine with the time, and then I'll just go quickly, like please, any question, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know, so.
Do you get the same questions over and over? Meaning, is there a part of your story that you can incorporate
answer that,
and
yeah.
answer the question in advance?
That's a good question.
I don't know, maybe not.
Well, sometimes, I'll talk to them about what they do, and, I'll talk to them about their body language, that, when a cop is,
Intimidation.
or when a cop is giving some space and kind of maybe even lowering their, down a little bit instead of the.
Do you tell a good story, an example of like something that you, and then contrast that?
Like you did tonight.
Yeah, what you did tonight was pretty powerful.
Yeah,
Is
I
that-
do, I mentioned the different cops, I tell that every single time.
And you'd say, because I even think, I want to say, reflect back to you what you said to me, I want to know what you're feeling. I mean, when you dipped into the bit of paranoia, also everyone can relate to, like, it's not paranoia, it also could be on purpose to fuck with you.
Yeah, sure.
Because,
Sure.
but,
Well, I tell them, you know, I definitely said, you know, they're driving me, I'm in this car, they're not telling me where I'm going, they're not talking to me, or they're laughing at me. And, I figure they're gonna kill me. So, and then when I'm in the hospital, I have that same belief, either they're gonna kill me, or I'm actually in hell. The same things are happening the same days, they're giving me the same pills, or, there's so much stuff, but it's sort of like, what is it, you know, what does he want of me, or what does I want to tell you? I don't.
That's the question, right?
well, it sounds like
Yeah, I
part of it.
mean, with you, I mean, you had an experience, obviously. I mean, how do you do it? I mean, do you share details, or do you just kind of?
Well, if you're asking me in the context of story,
Right.
we don't have to limit it to our conversation to that.
Sure.
It's different because
Okay.
it's very crafted. So if I was casually telling you that crafted story, it wouldn't sound as crafted because that gets weird.
Like,
I'm
what would
not
your
on a
purpose be?
microphone where it's not, I'd just be more loose about it. But this kind of gets back to what we're saying, is I am very clear on, sure, the experiences of being in the hospital are experiences, they're not stories. The story is, for me, the change, which means I could have 10 stories about my experience in the hospital. One was realizing that hospital, UNC, which is supposed to be a pretty good hospital, sucks.
Oh, yeah.
That's my story. I get to say that, right?
They
But
tried
there's
to-
another
They tried
one.
to put me in there when I was just giving blood for a checkup.
But to answer your question, what do I choose to include? Because there's so much. Well,
Yeah.
if my story is about me realizing it's not such a good hospital after all, then what I choose to include all leads to that, which allows me to not include certain things. Because if I include everything, I'll need 14
Now,
hours,
is that, when
right?
you say it's a terrible hospital, do you have a reference point for other hospitals?
That's a great question. I was in a kind of similar hospital about 10 years earlier. It was equally shitty. They both sucked.
Yeah.
And I kind of don't need a reference point. I know what it is to treat someone humanely.
Right, I just thought,
So, yeah, could there be
And
worse hospitals?
specifically
That's
UNC.
even more interesting to me that that's one of the better hospitals.
okay, that's how
You're framing it. Yeah.
Right. And it is considered one of the better ones.
Right.
And you treated me like an animal.
Right.
We're done with this conversation. I don't need to know anything more. But
Of course, I would love to know.
I'm happy to share more, but we're kind of splintering. One is
Yeah,
all of the stuff that happened, but the other sort of lens is the story. And one of the reasons I love this lens is it allows me to be very narrow and only talk about, so that when I'm done, you're like, all right, I got what happened, it's tight. If I just vomit,
Yeah.
yeah, a few people will latch on and be like, yeah, man, but mostly it's loose. That's what vomit is, right? It's just like, blah. And you're just hoping people connect with something you're saying. Maybe that's not the best example of vomit, but it feels like that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just pouring stuff out and I'm a little bit lost. I'm not quite sure where they're going. And
yeah,
maybe if we're the same age or I got in an accident, cool, I'm gonna listen more, but you're gonna lose people.
Well, sometimes I check in with them, I'll say like, because
Yeah.
I was sexually harassed at work, and it was during the time we needed help. And then someone like, you guys don't know that, you're so young, you don't know.
No, I
No,
don't
we
know.
know.
Yeah,
We're
I
probably.
think
We look
We're
good.
older than you
We
think
look
we
good.
are.
But you're also getting into stuff that isn't really story, but you're talking about a talk,
But it's the way,
presentation,
I'm
Q&A.
checking in, like,
Yeah,
you guys know about that, or
Right.
you ever heard of this or something?
Right.
And they're like, then they're like, yeah, they're like,
Yeah,
oh.
yeah,
You know,
Okay.
so you can kind
Yeah.
of gauge it more.
sure.
That's true.
Yeah, that's a choice. Some people break.
What?
Great story.
So there's really two camps.
Yeah.
There's one woman named Margo Lightman. She was a stand-up comic and wrote this big storytelling book. And you could tell,
What book?
she wrote a really well-known book. I think it's called Long Story Short. And she's a stand-up comic. So her thing is all about engaging with the audience and telling your story, which works for some people, especially if you have that skill set, which a lot of people don't have.
Right.
There's another book called Storyworthy by a guy named Matthew Dix. He's the opposite. Never break. Neither is right or wrong. He just never breaks. Everything's on him. If I break, you're not in the story anymore.
Yeah.
And his angle is just, I got you for 6 minutes, and I want to keep you for the moment. So he wouldn't ask a semi-rhetorical question. Are you guys
Yeah,
following
afraid it
me?
might go off on
His
something
angle,
else,
his
yeah.
head is, you're going to be following me. That I'm
I'm
going to
gonna
craft
tell a good
it.
enough
I'm going to
story.
craft this in a
Okay.
way where you will be following
I
me.
see.
And he's probably not always right, but he's
Right.
also very good at this. And
Yeah.
so, I don't know if that answered your question. I think in a Q&A format, from what it sounds like, sure, that makes total sense to ask a question like that. Just, you know. And it sounds like you actually want an answer as well. Because if someone's not following you, you need to know that.
Yeah, I don't know, I guess just, making it in sort of a little conversational,
Sure.
than just me proclaiming like all this stuff.
And if it's like this, it's one thing. If you're on a stage and you have a microphone and there's some lights,
Yeah.
that doesn't really lend itself as much to, we're just talking here.
Right.
We're just acting like, there's just different settings.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is specifically for police officers, I
Sure.
mean, I had a talk at like an event, and, it was for a celebration of courage, and, I sang a song too, and everything, and that was really more about what it's like to have mental illness, and I also work with people with mental illness,
Yeah.
and, just having that, wow. I guess the thing that really gets to me is when people are hurt,
Yeah.
and, so that really surprised me, it drives me crazy,
Yeah.
people are ignored.
You know, one
by the way.
Nobody likes
No
that.
one, right?
One of the reasons why I got into this stuff, and I really, really dove in, was because I heard a lot of people talk about their experiences, and they had so much courage to talk about it. I could tell. I could actually sometimes see that people weren't listening. I was like, so somebody's going to share this stuff, and like you're saying, nobody wants to not be heard. Maybe part of it's just it's 2021 and everyone has a phone in their pocket, but I don't think it's just that. They're just, fair or not, they're just default, speak my truth isn't always enough. They lose people, they're in their head. I get why. They're all over the place, and people can't really follow it.
Yeah,
So when I
yeah.
found a form, which I call story, it's not the only form, but it's the one I gravitate toward. I could take those experiences and put them in almost a package, so that when you say it, and you tell me this thing, I'm listening, and I might even relate to it, I fell in love with it.
Yeah.
Because all that stuff has a place to go, and now I can hear it. That's one of the reasons, the main reason. So I'm glad you brought that up.
So tell me, what do you have speaking events you do, or how do you,
That's a great question.
what do you do?
I'm working on it.
Okay,
Yeah, we have events here.
okay.
The events we've had here are curated events, so we work with storytellers, and a couple of them were like, ready, is it time?
Yeah, I can't wait to start at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So we have some different kinds of events. About 2 years ago, most of my stuff has been online. So now we're trying to see how do we take it into the real world.
So I'd
So it's
be
a kind of-
interested in following.
Yeah. I'm gonna follow up with everybody. You guys are in different places with these stories.
Mhm.
These stories will be crafted. I will create a space for you to tell it if you're open to it,
Thanks.
whether it's in person or virtual, because it makes a difference and you actually do it for people, and it's not just something that you're sifting
Oh, but I
through.
did improv comedy for a while, it was so much
Nice.
fun.
It is fun.
Yeah,
You down with that though?
but yeah, that's.
Crafting?
Yes,
I'm touching.
I'll send you a document, sort of much more clearly goes over some of the stuff and some additional stuff. It might be a little much, but you guys can handle it.
That sounds, yeah, I would definitely be up for that.
Yeah, and if you want to look at it, you can, and if you don't, and you just want to take some stuff from tonight and try, great.
I found this really helpful.
Good.
Thank you.
Totally, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad you came.
And
Worked out better
I-
than small.
I was gonna say, I'm glad, I'm kind
I
of glad.
do
I
this,
was-
this is what I do a lot of my dates. My groups are like 5 to 12, 15 max. We just geek out on giving and getting feedback.
But
And
that's
the
where I
feedback-
am, because I'm, you had said to me earlier, like, I might get you up there, and I'm like, well, I mean, that's
But a
fine.
lot of the feedback,
But just
feedback,
do it here is.
yeah. It's not just, oh, Sean's telling me, it's not that. It's, a lot of them are better than me, so their feedback is amazing. But it's a lot of what we were doing here. It's not, where can you add surprise or stakes or scenes or these other things that matter. It's, wait, what was going on in your life? Let's find the story. And then you talk about it, and there's places where you trust people,
Yeah.
and like, oh shit, that's what the story is, and that's a cool moment. But that sometimes takes
Right.
a conversation, and you trust people, and it could take a while. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is.
I
Maybe there
would-
is no story here. Well, I heard you.
Yeah. Well, and just, I keep going back to this because I just don't want to lose it, but it's Anne, right? Anne? Your response to Anne when she finished her story, to be able to say, like, we're all human, right? And I kept thinking back to your small comparison between good cop, bad cop, right? But it makes me think, and this may not be a storytelling
Sure,
thing,
sure.
but for your context of the workshops that you offer, starting at that place and asking them to think about, I mean, something is like frame it better, but good touch, bad touch, right? And how it makes you feel before you even share that it was a cop experience. Asking the cops to just think about a time when they were treated one way than the other, and then when you get to say your stuff, there might be more human connection to it, and it is your story, but you've already planted the seed about, how do I feel if somebody just gives me space? How do I, like, they're invested in a different way? And again, I don't know if it's storytelling versus just the context, but it made me, think I just wanted to say that for consideration.
Oh.
Okay, well, thank you.
Because the humanness really struck me too. And I still think that guy's such an asshole. Like, a strong reaction figure to
Yeah.
but it underscores the humanness part. So,
Yeah. One thing that also mentions one thing that's recently is that it's so strange to me is, well, I have bipolar, so, that these things happen and I end up in the hospital. And when these things happen, it doesn't happen all the time, obviously, but when it does get to that, I don't think to myself, like, has this happened before? Or like compare it, like, oh, that other hospital was this or that, and just totally like in the moment and just like trying to get away and protect myself and all that. You've got these random people doing crazy stuff all
Yep.
around you. And,
Yeah.
oh yeah, take these pills, okay? You know, and no, you gotta be swallowed, you know, all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's some bad stuff there. But yeah, so yeah, we can't even go back there again.
I think there's a lot of people don't know what it's like.
So dehumanizing.
So dehumanizing.
at
go
exactly
in
the
there to
time
get
you're
help.
asking for human help.
You go in there and get
Need
help.
help when you get
And there are exceptions, the minority of people that are really out of control. Maybe you need to be shut down. And decisions need to be made. But most people, that's not
They don't respond
at
that way.
all. You're treating him like a fucking animal. And then what's fascinating to me, in my experience, was you're treating me like an animal. And then you're evaluating me based on how I respond to how you're treating me. Which is like, fuck you.
Yeah. Fuck yeah, totally.
Right.
That's
Well, you know,
right, that's right.
The other thing I'm thinking of too is like, like to your point, I'm not sure if this fits into the storytelling, but I'm thinking like, okay, who here has high blood pressure? Who here has asthma? Who here has this?
Oh,
Well, guess what?
right.
Guess what?
Yeah.
Guess-
Well, that's a good
Imagine
one.
being judged. You're out of breath, having an asthma attack, and someone's like, "Wow, you're really out of shape. You need to like, I can totally see how
Yeah, I don't know when you would call that, but it's a great mechanism or
great,
device.
to realize like, well, guess what I have?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, great.
and who here has something?
Yeah.
Or knows someone who has something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times they'll talk about like diabetes because it is more of an involved medical condition.
And it's more measurable.
It's more what?
It's more measurable. Physical diseases are measurable.
Right,
It's tricky to compare it.
When your
But
sugar is this, then you
Your
do
sugar's
that.
down and this chromosome's doing that, you have diabetes.
Yeah.
And it's so mental illness is that, but it's tricky.
And it's the tragedy of it is we all have something with us. But
Yes.
when you're persecuted, made fun of, alienated, dehumanized because of it, it amplifies in
Amplifies.
such a larger
Especially
extent.
that,
And
right.
so
Right.
it's just
Right,
terrible.
right, and the fact that people really do have to consider before sharing that. Whereas somebody with diabetes, they just blurt it out in the supermarket.
I mean, there are probably some people don't, but yeah, safer. Probably safer.
I would definitely say.
Safer. It's just, yeah, it's
But
complicated.
from, our culture doesn't, I mean, I don't know, maybe Italy does, but our culture doesn't do a good job from early on even saying,
Right.
like, we know if you break your hip, you go to the hospital, and that's not shameful.
Yeah.
So why is going for any type of mental health, why should it be?
It is.
But our
really
culture has
poorly.
treated us this, yeah. If they've taught us that it's a shameful thing, but it's just health. Like anything else, it's just,
But I don't even know, but that conversation isn't working.
Yeah, no, I know.
So,
Right. It's story though.
The
story's
What
part
you're
of it.
doing is that.
Yeah.
that
I gotta
changes
get to your
hearts.
heart in a way that me just talking
Yeah.
about it a lot
yeah,
isn't.
you're
It might
absolutely
be
right.
working, I don't know what's happening all over the world, it might be working really well, but, that's why I think the story's done well, and this is
Well-
getting a little subjective, what
Yeah.
well is, but I have a gauge that makes a difference that a poorly crafted story doesn't do.
Right.
I know that, I've
Right.
seen it a lot, so I'm like, no, I'm gonna push you, because I've seen it.
Right.
I've seen my stories change and get better based on feedback. And the change of telling that story in the hospital and what people came up to me and how they responded, they don't say that, it's a different kind of, it's powerful. And I don't give a shit, I don't need people patting me on the back. They're affected. I don't know what will happen after that, but I think I increased the likelihood that maybe they walk away with a slightly bit more empathy. And will that go away tomorrow morning? Probably, but all I can do is that. But if I got up there and I just winged it, I don't think that happens. Probably not.
So, stories that you remember a good story.
Yep.
You know, it sticks with you.
You remember, yeah. And I think one of my goals is to help. I don't think people know what it really means and what a good story is. It's subjective, but there are certain things that just work. And I think the way we use it so loosely, like, what's your story? Hey, bro, what's your story? I'm not asking you to tell me a story. I'm thinking, like, who are you? We use the word so loosely that people don't know what the fuck they're doing. And I know it sounds too didactic, but it's not. They're just not doing a good job. And knowing that there's rising action and details, not enough. It's not enough. It's not. You're not. You know, we learn essay writing.
Yes.
We don't learn story.
Right.
You know why that sucks? Because in essays, you tell me everything I need to know before.
Yeah.
Hey, the equivalent is like, yeah, so I'm going to tell you a story about how I thought I didn't think I was going to live anymore, but ultimately I decided I was going to live. It's like you just told me the whole fucking thing.
Right. But that's what you're supposed to do in an essay.
And that's what you're supposed to do. We train that for years. Strong topic sentences, thesis, tell me what you're going to tell me, and then you support everything, but you just told me everything, so I'm going to check out because I know where you're going.
So it's
Right,
different
you're
practice.
scared and that, it's often the opposite. We didn't really get into the surprise thing, but that's another thing. Yeah, it's like, don't give it away.
Yeah.
Big.
But think in
Not manipulative. Not manipulative.
No.
Don't give it away. Don't tell us before. So then this is a narrator thing, and I know we gotta go, but you gotta tell. Often the most powerful narrator is the one where it's happening then, not you now looking back.
But I was
in
in
1999.
Yeah.
You didn't know what was gonna happen in 2004, but you can't get ahead. You didn't know that. That can be so powerful. But people get ahead.
Yeah.
You need to get ahead.
Slow down.
It's fine. Yeah.
That's great, Sean.
Thanks, dude.
Thank you, Sean.
Sorry so
all
much,
over the
Madeline. I
place.
could have probably
No,
learned
no,
more
no.
from you.
No. I'll send you something, and maybe it'll help and clarify all my babble. Because there's a lot, but I think there's certain things that matter more than other things, and there's not a lot. If you get those down, you're going to be better than most, which matters because people need to hear it. You know?
Guys,
Awesome.
Nice to meet
Nice meeting
you.
you.
I'm
you all.
pleased to know that you're doing the work you're doing. Oh, thank you. That's.
Was this like a torture room or like?
I know.
Alright.
The only time I've been down here, they were making
I know,
a film, and so when I came down, I'm like, oh, it's a different film.
This is like an interrogation room.
Exactly.
Like, wait a minute, you.
No, I think they have like kind of waves and